Dan was in the women's restroom, fixing the exhaust fan, when suddenly a dead rat fell out and landed directly on his face, making him feel sick. After barely managing to fix the fan, he rushed to a stall to throw up. Just as he was about to leave, he heard two people walking into the restroom. Terrified of being mistaken for a pervert, Dan quickly locked the stall door. Two girls in Christmas outfits walked in, talking loudly. One of them mentioned a homeless man had bitten her, which made Dan curious enough to peek. What he saw next almost made him pass out. The girl who was bitten suddenly turned into a zombie and attacked her friend, biting her violently. As blood splattered everywhere, Dan knew he was in serious danger. He desperately tried to call the police, but in his panic, he accidentally dropped his phone into the toilet. The noise caught the attention of the zombie, who began banging hard on the stall door. Dan, frozen with fear, stayed completely silent, but to his horror, the zombie started crawling under the stall door and grabbed his pants. Panicking, Dan fell backward, and by a lucky accident, his foot slammed down on the toilet lid, sending the zombie straight into the bowl and flushing it away. Dan quickly took the chance to crawl into the neighboring stall, hoping to escape amid the chaos. But just as he reached the restroom door, he ran right into another zombie. The undead creature, spotting fresh meat, immediately dropped the fried chicken it was holding and lunged at Dan. In a frenzy, Dan accidentally set off the hand dryer, and the noise briefly distracted the zombie, giving him a small moment to dart out. However, the situation outside was even worse. The entire place was overrun by zombies. With no other choice, Dan retreated back to the restroom, where he let out a scream of pure frustration. After all, he was only there to fix a fan, and now he was stuck in the middle of a zombie outbreak. Determined not to let another zombie squeeze under the door, he blocked the gap with a nearby advertisement board. As the zombies continued to pound at the door, he started using the restroom mirror to reflect his movements, hoping to confuse and lead the zombies away. After some clever moves, he finally managed to screw the fan cover back into place. Just then, Dan noticed a phone mounted on the wall. He rushed toward it, ready to call for help, when he suddenly remembered his own phone was still sitting in the toilet next door. Reluctantly, he retrieved the soaking wet device, wincing in disgust. After rinsing it off quickly, he tried to dial the security office. He managed to say only a few words before the phone short-circuited because of the water damage. Dan's last hope vanished, and his mind started to break down as he was overwhelmed by frustration and despair. In the middle of his meltdown, a soft voice called out from the neighboring stall. It was a girl, and through their conversation, Dan learned her name was Heather. She was also trapped in the restroom. Although he couldn't see her face, the sound of her voice made Dan believe that Heather must be beautiful. Being single for 30 years, he quickly became completely fascinated by the idea of her, even though they hadn't met in person. In his mind, he promised to protect her and get both of them out of this nightmare alive. Heather's voice brought Dan back to reality, allowing him to calm down and start thinking clearly. He climbed over into the neighboring stall, where he found a zombie's torn clothes. Using a severed finger, he fashioned a homemade slingshot with the goal of hitting the fire alarm. If he could set off the alarm, rescue would soon follow. Dan tried several times but couldn't hit the target. Just as he was getting ready for another try, the bathroom door suddenly swung open. To his surprise, it was the building's security guard, and judging by his look and manner, he seemed very professional. As Dan fired the severed finger from his makeshift slingshot, it flew accurately, straight into the security guard's mouth, getting stuck in his throat. The poor guard choked, struggling to breathe, only to be torn apart by the relentless zombies moments later. In his final seconds, the guard still managed to show his thanks to Dan. Watching the tragedy unfold, Dan was consumed by guilt, realizing that the small chance of escape had been ruined by his own actions. Thankfully, Heather's encouraging words brought Dan's determination back. He picked up the slingshot once more, but his shaky hands caused him to miss his shot again. However, in a strange twist of fate, the missed shot hit a ladder, sending it clattering down in front of him. Taking advantage of the situation, Dan quickly set up the ladder, carefully climbed onto the sink area, and successfully retrieved a toolbox. Just as Dan was enjoying a brief moment of success, the ladder slipped, and the hammer from the toolbox tumbled into the sink. Panic set in as Dan scrambled back into the safety of the stall. Although he returned without a scratch, his hard-earned prize was nothing more than some useless money. Meanwhile, the hammer, now in the hands of a nearby zombie, was used with extreme force, smashing the glass outside. Watching the destruction, Dan had a brilliant idea. He began taunting the zombie, trying to lure it toward the stall door. Just as he hoped, the zombie fell for the trick, bringing the hammer to the door and violently pounding at it. In a quick move, Dan snatched the hammer back when it got wedged in the door. Feeling like he had finally turned things around, Dan's relief was cut short. One of the zombies managed to bite his arm. Convinced he was going to die, he fell into despair, crying uncontrollably. But then, in an unexpected turn, Dan started laughing. The bite hadn't broken his skin because the zombie was wearing false teeth. With a sudden rush of hope, Dan realized he had just barely escaped death once more. The hole in the door made the zombies outside increasingly frantic. Realizing he couldn't just sit and wait, Dan decided to break through the partition wall behind him to save Heather. After a lot of hard work, he finally created a big enough opening and squeezed through. Following Heather's voice, he found her location and broke through another wall, finally seeing her. However, her sturdy body shape was very different from the image he had in his mind. Aware of this difference, Heather outright refused Dan's help, afraid he would look down on her. Dan quickly tried to explain that he wasn't that shallow, but Heather wasn't convinced. She opened up about her struggles, sharing how she was often mocked for her appearance and how tired she was of that life. Just as she finished speaking, she resolutely opened the bathroom door and a horde of zombies instantly flooded in, tearing her apart. Dan watched in horror, his heart heavy with sadness. This was his first real connection with a girl, and Heather's brutal death left him feeling completely helpless and heartbroken. After composing himself, Dan realized he had no choice but to leave the area. He attempted to escape through the ventilation system, but when he opened the vent, he was horrified to find it crawling with zombies as well. With absolutely no other options, Dan returned to the safety of the bathroom, only to be overcome with emotion upon seeing a drawing of Heather on the wall. He broke down in tears, mourning her loss. As he wiped his eyes, a sudden, ridiculous idea hit him, something so crazy it just might work. Dan quickly sprang into action, wrapping himself from head to toe in toilet paper, covering himself like a mummy in the hope that it would help him blend in with the zombies. After carefully getting his disguise ready, Dan gathered his courage and charged out of the bathroom. Amazingly, his toilet paper disguise worked. It allowed Dan to walk past the zombies unharmed. He made his way through the eerily quiet hallway and managed to reach the elevator. After what felt like forever, Dan finally arrived safely on the building's ground floor. Before leaving, he took the time to draw a picture of himself and Heather on the bathroom door. It was clear that despite everything, Dan had a deep emotional side. Stepping out onto the street, Dan found a phone booth and quickly called his mom, warning her to stay indoors at all costs. But just as he hung up, he looked up to see the streets swarming with zombies. The phone booth was now completely surrounded. Will he be able to escape this time? So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you like the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.